Hello and welcome to Hard Copy on Channels Television. I'm Kayla Megwa. The Gaza War has been fought between Israel and Hamas-led Palestinian militant groups in the Gaza Strip and Israel since 7th of October 2023. It's Israel's 15th war in Gaza and sparked an ongoing Middle Eastern crisis. The first day was the deadliest in Israel's history, and it is the deadliest war for Palestinians in the history of the conflict. A lot has happened since October the 7th of 2023. Condemnations on Israel from the United Nations, and a rise in anti-Israeli sentiments. A ceasefire agreement that was called off. Support for Israel from the United States, particularly from President Donald Trump, and calls for an end to the crisis from all quarters. I'm going to read you a quote from my guest. Israel will not allow the Hamas terrorist regime to control the Gaza Strip and continue to terrorize Israelis and Palestinians alike. The Hamas leadership have stated clearly that they want to carry out further massacres of Israeli citizens, just as they did on October the 7th of 2023, and Israel will act as any country would to defend its citizens. Hamas can end this conflict immediately by releasing the hostages it has held for 529 days and lay down their arms. These are the words of my guest tonight, Ambassador Michael Freeman, Israel's ambassador to Nigeria. Ambassador Michael Freeman, welcome to Hard Copy.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me.
It's good to have you here with us. How are you?
I'm okay. You know, we've had better days, and the sooner we can bring back our 59 hostages, I'll be much better.
529, you mean?
Yeah, 59 hostages would have been held for over 529 days exactly.
Okay. Well, that's a lot of people.
Yeah, look, Hamas kidnapped on the 7th of October. They kidnapped over 250. A number of them have been released, but they're still holding 59. 59 Israelis. There's also an African in there. There are also people from Thailand. There are people with dual citizenship from other places. And Hamas are holding all of these people with providing no evidence of their status. We know they're torturing them. We know they're starving them. We know they're beating them. We know they're holding them underground. And it's utterly unacceptable. And Hamas needs to release them. You
put out that statement recently, basically doubling down on what we've been hearing, the rhetoric really we've been hearing from the Israeli government, which is that, look, we're acting as any country would act in a situation like this. How do you juxtapose that with the accusations that, you know, there's a massacre? People are saying that this is a genocide against the Palestinian people.
Well, those accusations are clearly ridiculous. They're not based on any fact. They're not based on any reality. We all understand what genocide is. Genocide is the destruction of a race, the destruction of a people, the destruction of an entire group, an ethnic group or a religion. That's not happening here. This is a war. War is bad, war is ugly, war is terrible, war is full of casualties. And that's what's happening at the moment in the Gaza Strip. And you know, the numbers that we're hearing, and I obviously don't believe the numbers that are being produced by Hamas, but Israel is doing everything it possibly can to avoid civilian casualties. We don't want to see any Palestinian civilian killed. We don't want to see any innocents killed.
And yet it does feel like a lot of civilians keep getting killed all the time.
Well, civilians...
This last strike, when the ceasefire agreement was withdrawn, 400 was the number that we heard. Children involved, we heard medical personnel involved as well. So in many ways, we hear you, and we hear the Israeli government when they say, look, we don't want to kill civilians, but it does feel like a lot of civilians are killed in the process. We also understand that one of the things we've heard from the Israeli government is that, look, what these people do is that they use civilians as cover. What the terrorists do is use civilians as cover. And we see that happen in Nigeria as well. Isn't there any other way to get them without having to kill all these people?
I wish there was. We tried. There is another way. There's a very easy way. Hamas can release the hostages. Remember, Hamas are holding these hostages. They kidnapped from their bedrooms. They kidnapped them from their houses. They kidnapped them from inside Israel. If Hamas releases them and they lay down their arms, this is over tomorrow. This is over immediately. As soon as they release those hostages, we're done. That's the way this can end. While Hamas is saying we're not going to release the hostages, whilst they're saying openly and clearly we are going to plan for another October the 7th, there is nothing else we can do. We are acting as any other country would. Here we have a radical Islamist terror group that is holding Israeli civilians, that is attacking Israel, that is launched one of the worst terror attacks we've ever seen anywhere in the world in history on a scale that is unprecedented. And we are doing what we can to defend our people, and we won't stop doing that. If Hamas wants to stop it, release the hostages, lay down your arms, it's over.
Your Prime Minister says no more talks under a ceasefire. Any negotiations will be done under fire. You know? And many people have said, if you want a solution to a problem, you pedal down. It does feel like he digs in harder as the conflict gets worse.
But we've seen from Hamas that every time we give it some sort of break, Hamas digs in. Hamas refuses to release hostages. For the last 3 weeks, no one's come out of Gaza. Not a single hostage has come out. And Hamas have enjoyed all the benefits of a ceasefire without having to do anything in releasing the hostages. So we've shown that the last 2 ceasefires where Hamas has released hostages came as a result of Israeli military pressure. They did not come because Hamas felt like being nice or being generous. Hamas is a extremist, radical terror organization, a genocidal organization. And the only way to deal with people like that is to put military pressure on them until they release hostages and until they agree to have a ceasefire. And that's the problem. It's not Israel that broke the ceasefire, it's Hamas that broke the ceasefire.
I think it's important to note at this time, so our viewers can understand that these are your views and not the views of the station. But it's also important that we put it out there that the Palestinian ambassador or whoever spokesperson they have from Palestine is also welcome to respond to some of the things that you have stated here, because this is an ongoing crisis with a lot of shifting sides from time to time. But I want to be able to get your thoughts on some of the anti-Israeli sentiments. It's crazy. It's crazy. Even here, we've heard stories of people who, you know, had to do some stuff with the Israeli embassy or do something about Israel and get a lot of backlash online from people saying, look, you're basically supporting people who are killing children and women and health workers and aid workers around the Gaza Strip, you know. So those anti-Israeli sentiments that have caused protests in Europe and around the world, how do you feel about that?
Well, I would ask all those protesters a couple of questions. Firstly, if you ask experts from Britain, experts from America, John Spencer, who is one of the experts at West Point, one of the leading military colleges in the world, and if you ask Colonel Kemp from the UK Army, they will tell you, and they've studied, they've been in wars, they understand what war is. They will tell you that of all the conflicts they've ever studied, they don't believe there's ever been a case of an army taking as much care to avoid civilian casualties as the Israeli army have done. You know, the United Nations have what they call a general statistic of the number of non-combatants that are killed for every combatant in normal urban warfare. If you take the history of urban warfare, traditionally for every terrorist that's killed, 9 others are also killed. In the conflict in Gaza, that number is approximately 1 to 1. For every terrorist that's been killed, a non-combatant has also been killed. Now, whilst that number is terrible and it's tragic for all of those people who've lost their lives, the innocents that have lost their lives, it would prove to be the most carefully controlled war in history. In history. So I would say to all of those people demonstrating, what are you really demonstrating about? What are you really objecting to? You're objecting to Israel getting back our hostages? You're objecting to Israel taking actions that any country in the world would take.
They're objecting to the images of children being killed.
But I would ask the question, where were they on October the 7th when Israeli children were being murdered? Where were they when Israeli children were being massacred?
But two wrongs wouldn't make a right.
Where were they? No, but I'm saying to you, where were they? I'm saying to you, they don't really care. I'm saying to you something different. At the moment, the greatest number of people dying is in Sudan. It's not in Gaza. We are seeing a war taking place in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine. We are seeing wars taking place everywhere. Where were they when 250,000 people were dying in Syria that were being gassed by their own leader? Where were they when the women were being murdered in Iran? Where were they when their people were being killed in Lebanon? Where are they now when people are being massacred in Sudan? No, they only come out on the streets when it's Israel that's involved. And I want to ask that question. Why is it that when it's the Jewish state involved, people are out on the streets? When it's other states out in the world, everybody's totally silent. What is it that's going on there? Why is it that that's happening? Because it's certainly not about human rights. It's certainly not about defending the people that they're talking about, because they were never there. They've never been there. They've never been on the streets of all these other things. They only come out when Israel is involved and when they don't have the facts, and they only come to condemn Israel. And it's outrageous. It's morally wrong. And by the way, it's not helping the Palestinians. Because what's the message to the Palestinians? You don't have to take responsibility for what you've done. You don't have to take any responsibility for what happened on the 7th of October. Because if you really wanted this to stop, tell Hamas to release the hostages. Because the minute Hamas release the hostages and they lay down their arms, this is over. Hamas are just as terrible to their own people as they are to Israel. So I challenge all those people demonstrating. You want a better life for the Palestinians? You want the killing to stop? Stand up and say to Hamas, not to the Palestinians, say to Hamas, release the hostages. Release the hostages. Lay down your arms. And then we can move forward and we can have peace. Because Hamas have said clearly, they will never accept Israel's right to exist. They will never accept a state of Israel to be there.
Does Israel respect the rights of the Palestinian nation to exist?
Look, the Palestinians are our neighbors. And we need to work out a relationship with the Palestinians that allows us to live side by side with them in a peaceful way. And that is the aim.
A two-state solution.
Well, we have to understand exactly what that means. If the state next to us is going to be a state that's run by Hamas, then that's not in the interests of the Palestinians. It's certainly not in the interests of Israel. And I don't think it's the interests of the world. We don't want another terror state coming around. So I think that that's a conversation to look at in those conversations. What's clear is the Palestinians are there. What's clear is the Palestinians are our neighbors. And what's clear is we need to have peaceful relations with them.
I want to talk about that. A Palestinian nation, a country recognized as Palestine, would that be something that the Israeli government would be favorable to?
Well,
you said if it's run by Hamas, then no. If it's a democratically elected government, and a nation of Palestine, recognized by Israel, is this possible?
I think that anything's possible, but we have to see where, at the moment, that's obviously not a realistic conversation to be having. We have a Palestinian Authority that is still not condemned the 7th of October, that haven't had elections for 20 years within the Palestinian Authority. You talk to me about democratically elected government. Well, a democratic election doesn't mean you have an election once 20 years ago. It's not one person, one vote, one time. It needs to be a proper functioning democracy. When the minute that they stand up and say, we accept that Israel as a Jewish state has a right, has been there for thousands of years, that there is a history there, and the Jewish people, this is their ancient homeland, then there's a conversation to have. You mentioned earlier about the Palestinian representative here in Nigeria. He openly says that he will not accept a Jewish state of Israel. He doesn't accept it should happen. Now, when that's the official line of the Palestinians, then of course there can not no. What's the basic? The very basic is they recognize our history, our connection to the land, and the fact that we have the right to our own independent country. In 2000, we had an offer on the table. President Clinton brought Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak and the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat to Camp David, and on the table was an offer of 96% of all of the West Bank and Gaza, a division of Jerusalem, an end to conflict, an independent Palestinian state. And what did Yasser Arafat say? No. Ehud Olmert, who was the Prime Minister, he went even further and offered over 99% of the land with land exchanges for the other areas. Recently, he released the map. 3 or 4 weeks ago, he released the actual map that was offered. And what did the Palestinians say? No. So we have to remember, every time that Israel's made an offer, in 1947, when the United Nations first established the State of Israel, they established it alongside an Arab state. That was the partition plan. What did the Arab states say? No. In 1968, in Khartoum, the Arabs issued a 3 no's. No recognition, no negotiations, no peace. Again, we offered an opportunity for a 2-state solution. The Palestinians said no. We offered it again and again and again. And every time the Palestinians have said no. So at this point, we need to remember that history and stop saying, when are you going to, when are you going to? Because we have. We have done every single time, and every single time the Palestinians have said no.
We do have to go on a short break, but when we come back, of course, we'll be talking a little bit about Donald Trump and the support that he has for Israel. And of course, the biggest question that many people have been asking for the nation of Israel, which is, are you not a little scared of being isolated by the rest of the world? It's already beginning to happen in many areas. And then, of course, we'll be going into the relationship between Israel and Nigeria in the light of this long war. So please, stay with us on Hard Copy. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Hard Copy. If you've just tuned in, we've been speaking with Israel's ambassador to Nigeria, Ambassador Michael Freeman. Thank you so much for being with us on the program.
Pleasure.
So let's talk about fears of isolation. Well, maybe not fears that Israel may be harboring, but many people will ask, look, you can't have just one friend in the whole world. You know, at some point, you will need to make friends with other people. And the longer this war continues for, the less friends Israel seems to be making around the world. What are your thoughts on that? Or is that a wrong assumption?
Well, with respect, I think it's a wrong assumption. I think that Israel has many, many friends. And this war that Israel is fighting is not a war only between Israel and Hamas. It's a war between the forces of good and against the forces of evil, the forces of just and the forces of the West against radical extremist terrorism. It's the same terrorism that we see here in Nigeria. It's the same terrorism of Boko Haram. It's the same terrorism of ISWAP. It's the same terrorism we're seeing in Europe. It's the same terrorism we're seeing across the world. And I think that that the countries around the world understand that. And we are certainly in no way isolated. We've seen over the last couple of weeks many foreign ministers in Israel. My foreign minister has been across the world in the last few weeks as well. We saw Prime Minister Netanyahu visit President Trump in the White House, the first foreign leader to do so. So Israel is anything but isolated.
I want to be able to get your thoughts on the people in Israel. There are talks out there, and not everyone is on the side of this war in Israel, and they have their justifications. Is there any kind of thought process you have about that?
I am very proud of the fact that Israel is a democracy. It's a democracy in a sea of non-democratic countries. And it's a really true democracy where I can get up and I can protest and I can disagree with the government. Nothing's going to happen to me tomorrow. And so in any country, in any healthy democracy, there are people who don't agree with government decisions. But what I can tell you is that even those people who don't agree with the government decisions, they all support our armed forces. They all support our soldiers, and they all support bringing back our 59 hostages. They all agree that the government must bring back our 59 hostages. They may disagree about the tactics, and they may disagree about the way to get there. But the aim of making sure that all 59 hostages come home and making sure that Hamas can never do this again, that is 100% support across the country in Israel.
But when it comes to the relations between Israel and Nigeria, it's a bit complicated, isn't it? Because there are quarters who believe that Nigeria, policy-wise at least, firmly stands behind Palestine. And in the UN, we've seen walkouts, you know, when each side is speaking, of course. But how do you manage that relationship? In your case in Nigeria, and then for other ambassadors of Israel who are in countries that, you know, align with Palestine, especially when it comes to the broader conversations at the United Nations?
Well, look, every country has conversations with others. All bilateral relations are involved, and no two countries agree 100% all of the time. And when it comes to Israel and Nigeria, we have very strong and very positive relations with Nigeria that go back many, many years, and they're in many, many different areas. On the issue here, on the fundamentals, I don't think we fundamentally disagree with Nigeria. I think that Israel and Nigeria agree about the real danger of terrorism. We agree on the threat of terrorism. Nigeria understands really on a day-to-day basis what terrorism is, what radical terrorism is. You know who Boko Haram are. You know who ISWAP are. You know what kidnapping is. You had the Chibok girls were kidnapped in Nigeria. And so Nigerians, I think, on a level, understand the challenges that Israel is facing. We may have differences in policy, but that's normal between countries, and we may have differences on how we can achieve certain things. But Israel and Nigeria have a strong and a positive relation, and there are so many areas that we can be working in together to make a better future for both Israel and Nigeria. And obviously, as an ambassador, those are the areas I'd prefer to focus on rather than the very limited areas where sometimes we don't agree 100%.
When it comes to this war, what are your thoughts on where Nigeria stands as a country, policy-wise, on this particular war?
Well, I think that that's probably a question for the Nigerian authorities as where Nigeria stands. But Nigeria at the moment has made clear that it wants to see an end to this conflict. They've stated they want to see the hostages released, and I certainly would echo that. But we don't necessarily agree on the immediacy of a ceasefire. We haven't yet seen,
because that is what the Nigerian government has been saying.
But we haven't
We've been calling for that ceasefire.
Right, but until Hamas are ready to release the hostages, then what happens? We've just proven something. We had a ceasefire, and Hamas released hostages, and then they stopped. And for the last 3 weeks, they didn't release any hostages. And not only did they not release hostages, we have evidence that they were planning for attacks on our troops and attacks on our communities again, that they were making plans for further attacks. And therefore, I would ask the question, what do you expect Israel to do when we see that there are no hostages coming out, that Hamas are using the opportunity of this ceasefire to rearm and to prepare to attack us again? We're not going to sit there and allow us to be killed again. The days of us standing and allowing Hamas to come across the border, or not allowing, but the days of Hamas coming across the border are over. The days of Hamas being a threat to the state of Israel are over. They will never threaten the state of Israel or our people ever again.
As we wrap up this interview, I want to be able to get your thoughts on the future. What does peace even mean? Well, you've told us what the Palestinian government, if they get the kind of government that you term acceptable, what they have to do to be able to be accepted by Israel. What are there sacrifices on your side that you think should be made for peace to reign?
Look, all Israelis want peace. All Israelis want a better future. We've seen what peace is like with the United Arab Emirates. We've seen what peace is like with Bahrain, or with Jordan, or with Egypt, or with Morocco. Who would have thought that any of those things were possible a few years ago? So peace is absolutely possible. Peace is our dream. And we need partners. And our hand is outstretched for partners and for anyone who wants to have peace with us at any time. Because peace is only a beneficial. Peace is one of those things.
I want to tell you why I asked this question. I asked that question because in our conversation today, it's always felt like, oh, we were the ones who were wronged. They are the ones, they've been planning to kill us. You said that so many times. But when you speak to Palestinians, they have a totally different story. They say you don't recognize them. You don't want them to exist. You're trying to wipe them out. They're accusing you of a genocide. So when we have two people who are positioning themselves as victims in a protracted conflict, well, at some point we have to start looking at both of them and thinking, okay, what sacrifices do both of you have to make? But you've said what the Palestinian people have to, what the Palestinian government has to do. What does Israel, in your view, have to do to end this?
But again, I've told you, in 2000 we made an offer. In 1948, there was an offer. In 1968, there was an offer. In 2000, there was an offer. In 2003, there was an offer. In 2004, there was an offer. There's been an offer. We've offered numerous times. Every time the Palestinians have said no. And the answer has been from the Palestinians, we want it all. Now, when you say that the Palestinians are accusing us of genocide, no, Hamas are accusing us of genocide. Okay? This is a terror organization. This is an organization that in their charter, in their very existence, is written, and you are welcome to go and read it, that every Israeli must die, but more than that, every Jew must die. They're not satisfied with killing just every Israeli and taking it over. They want to kill all the Jews in the whole world. That's who Hamas are. Hamas are a genocidal terror organization. And so when they stand up and say, oh no, the Israelis are doing this, the Israelis are doing that, these are the same people who came across the border and burnt whole families alive, that raped young women at a peace party, that massacred 340 people at a peace party.
I watched that documentary. I did.
And so what I'm saying
We Will Dance Again.
Absolutely.
Right? I watched We Will Dance Again. And after watching it, of course, gruesome, terrifying to watch. But then you start to listen to the other side, and it's almost as though this was retaliation for things that they've been doing to us for years.
I'll ask you a question. Is rape justified? Ever?
Never.
Is rape retaliation justified?
Never.
Is burning a 12-year-old girl in her wheelchair retaliation and justified? Are murdering whole families alive, burning them alive, torturing people, kidnapping people? That's not retaliation.
But they say you do the same thing to them.
But that's not true. But here's it's factually incorrect, and there's no evidence of that. Well, the difference is that Hamas filmed this. This isn't, when you watch these documentaries, the filming is not from us. The filming is from the Hamas. Hamas were proud of what they did. They are not only proud, they think it's the greatest thing they've done and they want to do it again. So we have to understand that there are not two equal sides in this conversation. There are not two moral sides on this conversation. One is the modern, moral Western state of Israel, and the other one is a radical terror organization that wants to kill every Jew in the world.
When we look at this crisis, an end to it is ultimately what everybody hopes for.
Absolutely.
And we're really hoping that comes through very soon, before we end this conversation. What's your word out there for the Nigerian government, for the Nigerian people, for people who are watching this protracted crisis? What do you want them to take away from this interview?
I want them to take away that Israel wants peace. We're desperate for peace. I want them to take away that Hamas can never be a partner for peace. Not because we don't want them to be, but Hamas themselves say they're not interested in ever being a partner for peace. They just want the end of Israel. And that if you really want to see peace, you need to push for the release of the hostages and for a new moderate Palestinian leadership that will move forward. If you really want a better future, then that's what you need to do. And that's what you need to say. And you need to separate some of the issues that are going on with a war, a complex war, and other areas where Israel, in agriculture and in technology and in all sorts of other areas, can work very, very well with Nigeria. And so that would be my message. Israel wants peace. Hamas doesn't.
Ambassador Michael Freeman, thank you very much for being with us on Hard Copy, and good luck with all you have ahead of you.
Thank you very much.
That's Hard Copy tonight. I'm Kayla Megwa. Good night.